Hey everyone, welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering people through storytelling and education. And today is a very informative episode. We have on Dr. Mona, and you guys know her as Peds.talk. She's on Instagram. Tons of you follow her. She is such a wealth of knowledge. In my interview with her today, I just asked so many questions as a first-time parent, hey, what do we do about fevers? What do we do about rashes? What do we do about development? I'm about ready to have another baby and I don't even remember anything from the newborn stage. So I'm what should I do to make sure that the baby's developing right and everything like that? And she just gives so much good free information. And she's so fun to follow and to talk to and just so easy to talk to. So I love my conversation with her. And I know that you guys are going to too. Before we dive in, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast. Leave a review, reach out to me, let me know who you want to have on, what episodes you want to be talked about. If you missed last week, it was all about sex with Irene, and it was a really good episode. And I excited for next week to come out too. We have an inspiring guest, and as you can tell, I'm out of breath right now, which I feel like I've been for most of my pregnancy, but it's been very heightened to the point where Vito's dude, breathe through your nose. And I'm I can't. I walk up the stairs and I'm just completely breathless. And I've been bouncing on my ball while I'm podcasting because my back hurts and everything hurts. This last week I lost my mucus plug. So I'm oh, that's exciting. Maybe labor will come soon, but I also know that you could lose it weeks before labor. It can grow back. There's so much that can happen. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I was babe, I lost my mucus plug. And he's oh my gosh, you're going into labor. I'm no, I'm not. But it did kick us in the butt to where we're we have some stuff to do. I am 38 weeks pregnant now. We haven't packed our bags. We need to finish a few things around the house. We started this last week, really getting stuff done. Just even getting rid of stuff. We took so many hand-me-downs from furniture to clothes to everything, beds. And now we're just getting rid of everything because we're okay, let's completely declutter. It was nice to have spare bedrooms, spare beds, especially when all my family was in town, but we got rid of 4 giant garbage bags of extra sheets, comforters, donated them to a shelter. And we're just man, how did we have, it took up an entire closet in a room upstairs, all the bedding and just completely reorganizing. We have tons of toys that were hand-me-downs that we're so grateful for. But at the same time, we're we can't, yeah, Jovi will love this toy in 5 years. We can't store it. We don't have the space to store it until then. So just kind of going through and organizing and getting stuff ready. It's getting real. And when I lost my mucus plug, I actually got excited. I have not been excited, to be honest, pretty much all pregnancy. I've just had a hard time being excited. I haven't felt well. I went from being nauseous and not feeling well to just being in pain and my back hurting every day, my pelvis hurting, just a lot of different things. It's hard. You guys, I know, understand just when you have your second, it's just hard chasing around another kid. And on top of that, still doing some work and cooking and trying to take care of your family. It's felt very just whatever, very, yeah, I'm pregnant. Okay. Blah. And there are definitely times where I try really hard to connect with the baby. Doing my birth affirmations have helped. Been doing that for a while, just holding my belly, saying things. When I hear the baby move, being oh, hi, and just trying to tune into my body a little bit. But I haven't been really excited about being pregnant until I started to lose my mucus plug. Then I was oh my gosh, it's going to happen. We're going to have a baby. I'm excited. I'm excited to meet who this person is growing inside of me. And it felt really good to feel excited and to feel that I'm ready for this. And I just want to share that because I know it can be hard going through pregnancy when people around you are like, oh my gosh, how exciting. Aren't you so excited? And you're just like, sure, sure, I'm excited. Yeah, that's great. Like, and that's just how I felt. And so I just want those of you listening that you're not alone. I actually felt that way for most of my pregnancy with Jovi too. I was just like, yeah, I'm pregnant. Cool. And there's just like such a wide range of emotions, and all of them are normal. All of them are valid. You know, when people are like, aren't you just so excited to meet the baby? Like, honestly, I've just been neutral. Like, yeah, sure, I guess. Like, they're going to come out sometime. I'll meet them. But I think a huge part of that too, like looking back with Jovi, it was just, I had her, I felt completely drugged, like from the epidural. I was so exhausted. She went to the NICU and I just didn't even really care. So I felt nothing. And then we got the news that she would be there for a week. And so you kind of go into like a protective mode of like, what if she doesn't come out? Like, I can't let myself get too attached. And I just had a really hard time bonding and connecting with Jovi. Like, once we brought her home, I obviously loved her and wanted to take care of her. I did everything I needed to. But I had a lot of intrusive thoughts and felt very disconnected and didn't feel like, you know, everyone's like, oh my gosh, the newborn, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. But like, I don't know. I just felt very numb. And so I think that's what I've been nervous for this time is just like, okay, like, can I let myself fully feel? What if something happens to the baby? And just trying to not be disconnected. So I felt like I started to get that excitement, and it felt really good to feel excited to meet this whoever's inside of me growing. But for those listening, I just want you to know that like, you're not alone. Like, if you didn't feel that immediate bond or connection, I didn't either. If you didn't even like feel it till months later, I didn't either. Honestly, Jovi was like 3 or 4 months old before I really started to feel connected to her. You know, and now she's like my little best friend. Like, I'm obsessed with her and I feel very connected. But it's not always this like picture that's painted, and that's okay. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It could be a sign of postpartum depression for sure. But we all have different journeys. The hormones are crazy, and just hold space for yourself and make sure you have people in your life who are doing that for you as well. But yeah, I'm actually getting excited, and I just wanted to share that because I didn't really feel that before. So I just know that you're not alone, no matter how you're feeling in it. All right, let's dive into this episode because it is so good, and I can't wait for you to hear from Dr. Mona. All right, everyone, I'm super excited about today's podcast. I've actually had some requests for this guest, and so I'm super excited to talk to her. I know a bunch of you follow her on Instagram, and we have on Dr. Mona today. She is a pediatrician, mom, and Infamil's infant development expert. She is a wealth of knowledge, and like I said, I know so many of you already follow her on Instagram, so it's going to be a super fun conversation just to be sitting down with a pediatrician today. I know as a new mom, I freak out over lots of things that I probably don't have to, and spend my time being Dr. Google over every little thing. So I'm super excited that she is here with us. So thank you so much, Dr. Mona, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to talk about, all of these things that you mentioned, and really just a pleasure to be on today.
Yeah. So I'd love to start with you just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself, and then how you kind of also created this Peds Doc Talk community and space where you just share so much great information for moms and people in the similar season of life.
Yeah, so I am Dr. Mona Amin. So I'm a board certified pediatrician practicing in private practice for 7 years now. So graduated residency almost 8 years ago. And I love being a general pediatrician, but through my journey in clinic, I realized how many patients were coming in, the parents having the same exact questions. What do I do about fever? What do I do about sleep training? What do I do about this? And one time a mom said, can you just create something where I can just go online and I don't have to call you? And I was like, I should probably create a resource where people can learn my education in the way that I talk about things in a platform. So I started my Instagram, Peds Doc Talk, about 3 years ago, and it took off. And then I ended up getting pregnant, having my own child, going through our own traumatic birth experience that was something that I never expected. And from that blossomed this whole new realm of Peds Doc Talk, which is this empowerment, education, middle ground approach to parenting. You know, I think a lot of social media is you must do this or that, you must do this or that. As a pediatrician, I'm lucky that I get to see and work with so many different families across various ethnicities and socioeconomic statuses. So I get to see what the real deal is. You know, what is the stuff that we should not be doing? What are the things that it's okay if you do? And how to really bring that big picture back to parenthood and especially motherhood, being a mother myself. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I partnered with Enfamil actually late last year in 2021, just as their developmental expert, because I really wanted to help educate mothers on development, immune health, things that, you know, I think a lot of mothers want when they become new parents. They want to know, what can I do for my baby's development? What can I do for their immune health? And so now I get to partner with them and write blogs and do outreach with activities like this and other media opportunities to really remind parents about the big picture with how they feed their kids and how they interact with their kids, so it can bring back more joy to motherhood.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. That's such a awesome introduction. I feel like there were so many things in there that I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Because like I said, as a new parent, I mean, I found myself just Googling so many things, but also being sold on so many things. Like, I can't tell you how many programs I bought just on sleep alone or on just different things. And now I'm pregnant with my second, and I'm like, it's going to be so different this time around. Like, I know that because I would end up Googling or taking a course, but still not finding the answer that I wanted, or like that sounds good for some people. I just don't think that'll work for us. So then I'd pay for another sleep course, you know, and just kind of went down this rabbit hole instead of, just kind of figuring things out, I guess.
And that's kind of what I think we've lost in this modern era, especially for mothers who are on social media. I feel like because there is a market, because I also sell a course, but my course is middle ground education. It's, hey, here's sleep training, but if you don't want to do cry it out, here are some other options. Here's how you feed your baby. If you want to puree feed or baby led wean, you need to know your options so that you figure out what's best for your family. With the understanding that I know child development like the back of my hand. I know things that, you know, are important. We can't do certain things with our children. We can't, you know, there's certain rules that need to be followed. But I feel like that was lacking so much in the space, you know, in education. And I feel like I can add that to so many families that are kind of like, well, I don't want this, but I don't want this, but what are my options here? So exactly what you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Because again, I took courses on feeding too. and it is hard because then in the social media space, I guess you do kind of feel like, oh, you're doing it wrong. Or you see somebody who's like, oh, were their baby sleeping 12 hours a night? And a lot of that too also doesn't like leave room for every kid is different. That might not work for every baby, you know, like,
yeah.
And so you're like, what's wrong with, am I doing this wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Instead of finding that middle ground and being like, okay, well, maybe this system's not working, or maybe my kid just wakes up a couple times a night and that's normal for them. Cool. You know, so it's hard.
Yeah, finding flexibility and being able to pivot are my two things, right? Meaning flexibility and understanding that you may have a goal as a mom or dad, but you may have a goal as a mom and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, right? I want to do this. But you have to understand and know, have the insight to know when you need to pivot and go into another direction. And that is what I'm trying to teach moms, especially being a mother myself, that if you want to sleep train, okay, but what if it's not working? What are your options? What are the barriers? If you don't like baby-led weaning because you're afraid of choking, how can we pivot and make that work for you? There's so much psychology behind parenting that we don't talk about. We think, oh, just do this, feed your baby, make them. No. There's also, your baby's not a robot, but also your own insecurities, your own upbringing is going to have an impact on how you mother, which I think that connection is so vital. And that's how you find your groove, I think, as a mom. You find your groove when you're finally like, hey, I feel comfortable in the decisions I'm making, but I also am not overwhelming myself with so much information, right? The information overload, the Google rabbit hole, it actually can lead to more unhappiness because everyone has different opinions and there's always something that you can learn, but you need to kind of tell yourself, I'm doing the best with the information I'm reasonably able to have right now. I don't need to know everything as a mom. I don't need to have everything figured out. I also have to realize that my baby, I'm going to learn from my baby too. I'm going to learn from their temperament and learn, okay, this is not working. I don't like how this makes me feel. And checking in with ourselves is so important as moms.
Right. Which I feel like is definitely a piece that is missing for a lot of people.
Oh, yes.
So I'm glad that you touched on that. We are going to take a quick break from this episode. I have had like so much on my mind, obviously, with the baby coming, and it's just like endless lists of, I need to do this, I need to do that. But sometimes I just need a break from my mind, but still do something a little bit stimulating. So that's when I like to play Best Fiends. It is a fun puzzle solving game that you can download and play whenever you have a few minutes or a few hours to get away and just have a little bit of fun and solve the games. I like doing all the side levels. That's kind of my favorite thing. But I have been advancing in the regular levels. I'm like on level 1682. So I'd love to hear where you're at because I feel accomplished being pretty far. But there's tons of cool game features, cute characters that help you solve thousands of fun puzzles. And the more you play, the more characters you collect, and the more you win, you get to face more challenges. There's thousands of levels. You can literally play as long as you want and never get bored. Trust me on that one. So download Best Fiends free today on the Apple Store or Google Play. That's Best Friends without the R, Best Fiends. So I'd love to talk about, because we were talking, obviously you're a pediatrician, but we're talking a lot about moms here too. And mommy brain is a thing. And I know this firsthand. Like the other day, my husband and I were doing something, and I'm 34 weeks pregnant, and we have a 16-month-old. So I'm like, the other day I did like 3 things, and he's like, babe, what is going on? And I'm like, it's pregnancy brain, it's mommy brain.
Yes.
It's all of it. But how do you kind of support yourself when you're going through all of these different changes, but also support your child? Because they need your help in developing and getting the things that they need from you as well.
So yeah, mommy brain is absolutely a thing. I mean, pregnancy brain is a thing. There's a lot of debate on what the etiology is. Obviously, we know it's hormonal. There definitely is hormonal changes that cause the various parts of your brain to change after you become a mom during pregnancy, but more so after you become a mom. The amygdala, parts of the brain that focus on bonding, on memory, changes, and it can change for the better. Sometimes it can change for the worse. I know from personal experience that I used to be able to multitask, where I could sit in a room, write an article, and have the TV on and have my husband speak to me. Now, if that is happening, I'm overwhelmed to be in silence, to be able to write, because I do a lot of writing. And it's so fascinating. Even my husband's like, what's going on? I'm like, he's watching basketball and I'm getting upset. I'm like, turn off the noise. He's like, you never were like this. I'm like, it's motherhood, man. It's like, it's a real thing. Not only is it happening because of hormones, it's also the amount of mental load we have, right? We are constantly running through the Rolodex of things we have to do for our child, for ourselves, sometimes for our partner, let's be honest, things that happen. And then also the things that you're doing for you. Like you're like always thinking, oh man, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to now order this thing for the new baby. And that mental load adds on to mommy brain because when you're thinking about so many different things, how it's going to be hard to be present, and it's going to be hard to focus on one thing at a time because your brain is in a wild pace right now. So it's very important from a developmental perspective to first recognize that this is happening and say, you know what, I'm feeling like I'm doing too much right now. I'm feeling like my brain is in overdrive. I believe that insight is one of the biggest gifts we can have as human beings and as moms. Insight into saying, okay, this is not what I'm supposed to be feeling like. I don't like the way that this is making me act or feel. That is the first step before we can even engage with our child, is to say, I don't know if I like how I'm feeling, and how can I get to a place where I'm feeling in a better state? Whether that's journaling, whether that's creating a priority list, whether that's scheduling and really looking at things that definitely need your time and being honest with yourself and saying no more to the things that don't. That is going to really help with mommy brain. And then in order to foster the development, it's really important to put those things away where you are setting up quality time with your child. I say this, like, I use the example of like 18-month-old. You have a 16-month-old, but like an 18-month-old, when you have so much to do as a mom, just say you come home from work and you have to do your dishes and you have to cook. I rather have you take a moment for yourself, whether that's sitting on the couch, whether that's doing what you need to do, if that means putting on screen time for your toddler for like 10, 20 minutes so you can sit next to him and just sit. I rather have you have that mental break so that you can come back to your child fully ready to engage. Half-assing engagement is not the way to engage with the child. I need parents to take the mental break, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's screaming upstairs, whatever you need to do, so that you can be mentally present when it's time to play with your child or time to be with them. That's also going to make it easier when they throw a tantrum. If we are going, constantly running, and not allowing that break for 5 minutes in a car before you enter your building of your home, right? You are just taking a breath, recentering if you had a bad day. You are going to allow yourself to have space for your child's emotions. You're going to allow yourself to have space to engage with your child. But if we're not allowing ourselves those little mini breaks in the day, you are not going to allow yourself to just be present. And being present is the key to having quality time with your child. And that is not impossible. I work part-time. I don't have help in the home. We lost our nanny. I work on Peds Doc Talk pretty much full-time. And it takes a lot of mental training and reframing to say, I need a break right now. My child, is inside the house, or inside daycare. I'm going to take 5 minutes before I go inside that building to just sit with my music. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to be able to be present for him, And that balance is what I think provides us that ability to just be aware and present for our kid when they really need us.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. And I would like to ask and kind of comment on, like that mental break also includes like putting your phone down and not just scrolling and things like that. So, which is something that I've had to work on because I work a lot on Instagram and podcasts. Like it's constant emails, different things. And my husband and I have had that conversation of like, it's so different when we're present with our daughter versus like if I'm on my phone and she's like, mom. And then you're like, what? Instead of like, she's like, mom. And it's like, hey, what do you need? But when we're distracted because we're so connected with our phones and plugging, like taking that mental break is not scrolling because your mind is still super active. So I just wanted to like comment on that and see kind of your opinion.
100%. I believe that our cell phones and social media have given us way more anxiety as moms and has allowed us prohibit us from being more present with our children. So what we usually do, and I highly recommend it, and it's not always that it happens because some days I'm waiting for an email because I have a deadline. But what I really encourage parents doing is especially in those evening moments, if you have a toddler or even a baby, really putting your phone away, meaning I started putting my phone upstairs on the charging station, not downstairs where we are hanging out. For 2 hours from 5:30 to 7:30, that is protected family time. If it means we're watching a TV show together, fine. If it means I'm playing with my son, if it means I'm cooking dinner. But what I don't want my son to see is that my cell phone is more important than he is when he has spent the whole day away from me, right? Mm-hmm. He has spent the whole day away. 9 hours, 10 hours, or not 9 hours, like 8 hours away in school, right? In a preschool. When he comes home, I want him to have the family time. And I am now organizing my life where I get everything done in those 8 hours. And it takes time to get there, right? Especially when you're a small business owner and you're running a podcast. I agree with that. But it's so important to me. I told my husband, I'm like, my goal this year, because my son is now 2 and he understands. When I'm on my phone, he bats it away. Mm-hmm. And I immediately take it as this is disrespectful to him. Like, I should not be on my phone. Imagine me and you hanging out and I'm on my phone the whole time. Like, no one wants that. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not fun. And for a toddler, they get it. They understand that mommy's not present. So I tell him, and if I have to take the email, I say, Ryan, he's 2. He understands. Ryan, mommy has to answer an email. I'll be right back. And I go physically away from him in the play area, go to my desk downstairs, send the email. He knows that now I've laid a boundary that I really quickly have to do something, but that I'm coming back for him, because I want him to have that understanding and that awareness that I respect him. I respect his time. I love him, and that my work is not more important than him. Mm-hmm. It never will be. I want him to understand that maybe there's going to be seasons where I need to take care of things, and I will tell him, right now, mommy has to answer an email, but I'm going to be right back to you. And then when I'm back with him, it's email away, cell phone away. Everything is him and me and playing with his cars, so that he gets that connection. I believe this is so important, not just for, we don't do this. You can do it in the newborn and early age, but definitely in those toddler ages, because they just are craving connection. The more connection they crave, the less likely they're going to be to throw tantrums, the less likely they're going to be to do things for attention, because they got your attention. They've had you. So I've noticed that the days I connect more for even just 10 minutes is the days that Ryan has less meltdowns, because he got me. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need to throw a tantrum to get my attention. He's had my attention. He knows that I'm there. But when we're on our cell phones, when we're distracted, they are more likely to throw things. They're more likely to get upset, because all they're craving is connection. Mm-hmm. They're human. They want our attention, and they want connection.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. And it makes total sense too. And we don't give them enough credit. Like you said, your 2-year-old knows.
They know. And even infants, like I talk downstream, you can do this in infancy. I think people forget that even though the infant is not talking back to you yet, I always, from the time Ryan was an infant, when I did what I was talking to you, if I was playing with him in his playpen when he was like crawling, I would verbally tell him, mommy will be right back. And I'm not leaving the room because of safety. I'm talking like going to answer an email or a phone call, right? And I set that verbalization so that he hears that I have to take care of something, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. I'm just taking care of something, and mommy will be right back. I don't just up and leave, because then for a toddler or a child, they're like, wait, where did my mommy go? Like, what's going on here? They understand like physical leaving, right? So when you start to verbalize, not only are you creating an expectation for your toddler that you can survive without me. I'm going to be back in like just a second. Like, I'm not leaving the room. I'm just going to the counter to answer an email that on my computer, but I'll be right there for you, and it really does help in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to start that communication.
Yeah.
And speaking of like the newborn stage, like what are some things that we can do to help support our newborn's growth? I know for me, I was like I remember the pediatrician at one point telling me how much tummy time I should be doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not even doing close to that. Like, I didn't know. Like, they're just like, here's your baby, take them home. And I'm like, okay, with like not knowing what I needed to do.
I will say the most important thing to remember is the first month to 2 months, you're in survival mode. Like, my job to teach families is to maximize development in those first 2 months is building social and emotional, which is learning about your baby, right? And then eventually cognitive, which is how the world works, eventually communication, eventually motor skills. But the first thing you're going to focus on is that social and emotional connection. How are you learning how to bond with your baby? Is it baby wearing? Is it tummy time on your chest when you're awake? Remember, for safety reasons, you can't fall asleep like with them on your chest. How are you learning about your baby's cries, hunger? What does all of it mean? And that is what I want parents to focus on initially. Cognitive development is so important to me. And I actually think this is one of the most underrated domains. I think we talk so much about motor and language. We forget that cognitive is actually the bridge of everything, as is social and emotional. So cognitive skills in a newborn can look like when they start to pay attention to faces. So, initially they'll start to just look at the fan, and they'll just look at, the circulating fan and be like, wow, that's cool. Or black and white images. This is all cognitive development. They're learning about how things work, figures work, and eventually they're going to start to look at your face and smile. I want you to interact back with them, smile back. If they make a sound back, that is going to help bridge language. So you are creating a foundation of language development from your child's cognitive base. They are learning about the world. Okay, well, what does mommy's face mean? What is this? They'll smile at you. And now your education for them is teaching and smiling at them back. Now you've created social and emotional bonding. Now you've created language bonding when you start to coo back, right? But you have to look at what they're noticing in the environment and connect with them in that aspect. Reading is also very important to me. Some families just don't like it. I don't need it to be this, oh, you have to read one book a day. Reading is just a very important connection, social and emotional. You're close to them. There's no phone, hopefully. There's no distraction. It's also great language development, but it really is also cognitive too, right? You are teaching them about the book as they get older. You're pointing things out. And that is going to be a foundation for the rest of their life for learning. So I like books as a vehicle, as a tool to educating your child on so many different domains. And you don't need to start reading them books at 1 month. Listen, like I said, the first month, you're in survival mode. Don't focus so much on, I need to be doing X, Y, and Z. But as you start to get in the groove, you're going to start doing those cognitive skills that I mentioned. You're going to start doing the reading. The other thing that I really like as a child gets older is floor play. Sounds weird. Floor play, which is when you play on the floor with them, and you can start doing this as early as 6 weeks of age when they start to have a little bit better head control, laying down with them while they're in tummy time, boosting them like on a little boppy pillow or something, and just being present with them as they're learning about the floor and how they'll learn motor skills through their activities on the floor. I actually have an article on enfantmill.com which goes over some other tips about infant development, not only just about what I mentioned, but about floor play and the benefits of floor play, and also the importance of creating a balance of independent play as well as interactive play. This is something so important. I think parents feel like we have to constantly be in their face all the time. Like I need to show them everything. We really believe, and I think it works so well, is that from the time that Ryan was an infant, my son, we fostered this independent play, which means he is in a playpen area. I'm in the room, meaning I'm not leaving the room for safety, but I'm allowing him to figure out and play with his toys. When he starts to feel frustrated or cry, I verbalize and I say, Ryan, I see that you're frustrated. I see that you want mommy. Mommy's coming right there after I, cook a meal or whatever. And then I go to him and I say, what were you frustrated about? He's only an infant, but that mentality helps serve you so well as you approach the toddler years, as you approach older children, and that you are empathizing and verbalizing what they're feeling, but you're giving yourself a moment and then you go to them. The more you allow that, the more you're going to see your child play independently, because they know that, okay, I'm frustrated, mommy's making me play, but she's going to come back. She's not leaving me. She's just taking care of something in the kitchen. Like, they're capable of understanding that with repetition. So definitely ways that we can make this a little more joyful, and that you don't feel like you constantly have to be in their face. You constantly have to be attached to them. Kids don't need us to constantly be in their face. They need us to teach them that if you need me and you really need me, I'm going to be there for you, but that you are actually really capable of learning things and figuring things out on your own. And if you're not, I am going to be the one to teach you because I'm your mom or dad or whoever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like I'm learning a lot for baby number 2 here.
I love it.
Like, okay, I need to work on these things. So one thing that you talk a lot about too, I mean, you're big on development, so brain development. So when we're first introducing foods to our kids, what are some of those early foods that we could introduce that are great for development?
I mean, really, I want parents to focus more on, I don't want us to get too bogged down on that versus just letting it be something enjoyable like play, right? Mm-hmm. Play should be enjoyable, right? We shouldn't force play. Like, you would never force a kid to play. Like, if they want to play, they play. If they're done playing, fine. Same thing with meal times and meals. I don't want parents to bring too much pressure to it. The best thing that we can do for babies' development in meal times is making it enjoyable so that it's not stressful from the beginning, from the moment we start solids. And then, of course, yes, introducing a variety of different food groups. So we know, and I don't want us to feel so pressured as to have every food group every day. But if you want to do a bare bones meal plan, it would be a fruit, a fruit at breakfast and snack, like just thinking of like an older child, a fruit at breakfast, a vegetable at lunch and dinner, and grains and starches, right? These are just your basic food groups, as well as something like a protein. I don't need parents to get so bogged down with, I have to introduce all of these in every meal, because I kind of think about it how we eat. As adults, I don't think you're thinking about, I'm eating a protein and I'm eating a vegetable and I'm eating a fruit. You just eat what you're eating. And I kind of want parents to get into the mindset that if you can have your child eat what you're eating, you're going to start to introduce the variety that way, right? I would hope that as a family, you are eating a variety of different meals. Like you don't eat like the same 2 things every day. But by doing that, you're going to foster their development by introducing various spices, various textures, various different foods from different cuisines. You know, if you hopefully eat diverse foods, you're going to introduce them to that variety by simply feeding what you're eating in a texture that they can handle. So whether you do puree feeding or do baby-led weaning, you're going to allow them to eat the various foods that you're eating, and that's going to provide them exposure to all those different food groups, which are great for their development. I really love, probiotics, probiotic-rich yogurts, any foods with probiotics I do like. But besides that, I don't want parents to focus so much on, oh my God, I didn't give them a vegetable today. I failed them. It's okay. It's all big picture parenting. You know, I don't eat vegetables every day. So why would I expect my son to eat it every day? You know? So I create that big picture that if we're eating vegetables for dinner, Ryan's getting vegetables for dinner, you know, and that mentality is going to serve you so well as you feed in the feeding journey.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely days where I've forgotten to give my daughter a vegetable, and I'm like,
totally.
Dang it. Like,
and it's fine.
Yeah, but she's a fruit fiend. This girl could live on fruit. So I try to give her other things besides fruit, but but yogurt, she's obsessed with yogurt. So that's good. Yogurt and fruit are usually the breakfast of choice for her. She's obsessed. But yeah, I mean, it is hard. I mean, and that could be stressful as a mom too, because on the days where I'm like, oh, I forgot to give her a vegetable, it's like, well, I have carrots, but I need to cook them, you know, I have this, but it's just not made. It's not in a form that she could really eat. So then am I going to take 20 minutes? You know, like it's just, sometimes it is stressful to try to figure it out.
And that's what I'm trying. I hope people can start to remove that stress and expectation, because at the same exact scenario, I wanted to give Ryan carrots and hummus because he loves it. I forgot. I like to steam them still. I don't like, he's 2, but I don't like giving him crunchy carrots yet. And I forgot to steam them. And I was like, oh man. So I gave him steamed peas. Like I just steamed the peas in the microwave with warm water. Yeah. And I gave him peas and salt and pepper with some peas, or I do edamame. Like there's alternatives, or it's okay if you give them packaged food one day. Like it's not going to kill them. I mean, they're going to be fine if you don't give vegetables every single day. But it's about, what I don't want parents to go down is that, okay, it means that you don't give vegetables at all, right? You want to introduce these things, but the one-offs, the days, the weeks that go by that you're like, oh man, I forgot. It's a big picture thing. You are going to get back into it. You now, like the fact that you even remembered, oh shoot, I should probably give my kid carrots, will probably now prompt you to warm up some carrots, which I did too, by the way, which is so funny you brought up that exact scenario. So it's totally appropriate, and it's really just letting go of those expectations and what it should be, and realizing that, okay, my kid eats vegetables. My kid eats fruits. Fruits are great. I mean, I think people vilify fruits and say it's too sweet. It's natural fibers, you know? Of course, I want them to be introduced to vegetables too, because that's great. But I think fruits are wonderful and should not be vilified. They are amazing source of nutrition. Fruit juices, not so much, but naturally occurring sugars that occur in fruit are not harmful for kids, you know? Do I want them eating watermelon for every meal? No. But do I want them eating peas for every meal? No. So it really is that balanced mindset that I think will serve a lot of parents well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The fruits are just easier because you don't have to like cook them.
Prepare, correct. And they're so good. I mean, let's be honest. They're delicious. I eat Ryan today for breakfast, same thing. Ryan had like a whole thing of strawberries. I don't know where his appetite came from today. He ate a whole thing. And I was like, yo, leave me some, you know, and I love eating fruit and yogurt for breakfast too. Mm-hmm. So he's taken after his mama. So maybe your daughter's doing the same.
Right. So introducing these different foods is awesome, which makes me think of kind of like growth, right? Like kids kind of grow at different rates. And I know that milestone comparisons can be very stressful amongst mothers. And Absolutely. There's the charts, right? Like at this stage, like I said, my daughter's 16 months. So I can't even remember how many pediatrician appointments she's had at this point, but every single time I'm like, where is she at on the chart? Like what, where's she at for height? Where's she at for weight? Where's everything at on the chart? Is that good? Is that bad? And how important are these percentile charts?
So the first thing I will say, and I probably annoy some of my parents, but they've now understood, is I never say percentiles in my office visits. What I rather have you ask is, how is my child trending in the last visit? Is more to the response of your question. So percentiles are kind of created to compare children against other children, which is what we don't want. What it is useful for is trends. What I want to see is if a child's on the 20th percentile, I want to see that they're not dropping down to the 5th all of a sudden. I want to see that they're not jumping up to the 90th. So a child who's steadily on the 20th, maybe going down to the 15th, going up to the 30th, that's okay. That shows me that that's normal trajectory. But what concerns me is if a child is on the 10th percentile, all of a sudden plummets down below like the first percentile, or is on the 20th and plummets, or the other way, goes up very significantly. That is concerning to me, because then I want to know, what's the feeding like? Are they getting too much? Are they eating too much where parents are overfeeding a baby? So that happens where they are literally sticking bottles or breastfeeding when the child doesn't need it. Like they're just overfeeding the baby. Or is it that we are underfeeding if there's a calorie restriction? This is so rare, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's so rare for us to see this in children unless there's a underlying medical disorder. And so that's the first thing, is to ask, hey, how's my child trending from the last visit? Why is it psychologically, when you hear 21st percentile, your brain automatically thinks, why is that not the 100th? And that is not how percentiles work, right? Mm-hmm. And I already see the disappointment on my mother's faces when I tell them, your child's on the 21st percentile, because they wanted to know. And they're like, oh, I'm like, that's not bad. Your child was on the 18th last time. That's amazing. So trends are way more important. So when you look at the curve, I have no problem if you want to look at it or see the numbers, but you got to think big picture. You got to think, well, what was my child before? How are they trending? Example being, my son Ryan on percentiles, when he was 18 months, he was on the 70th percentile for weight. We went in at the 2-year visit. He's running around. He went through illnesses. He dropped down to the 50th percentile. I'm a pediatrician. I know that he is developing well. He's thriving. It is normal for children to have fluctuations even on the curve. So you have to also look at the big picture of your child's development. I am way more concerned of that child who's not gaining weight, who's also not meeting milestones, who also is not growing in head circumference, who also is not just thriving and, seems to be sick with bacterial illnesses all the time. Then I'm concerned that there is an immune issue. There is a nutrition issue here. But like I said, in America, we are very fortunate that is rarely the case. I've been practicing for 7 years, 10 years if you want to include residency. Rarely do I see a child have a true issue that is like medically indicated that this is why they're not gaining weight. And that's something that we'll probably find in infancy if we do. Mm-hmm. But it normally comes down to, we all have different genetics. We all have different trajectories on our growth, and looking at your child's overall development when you're thinking about percentiles.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, yeah, those percentiles can be tough. I was a peanut, like as a kid.
Yes.
I weighed 17 pounds when I was a year old, and my daughter weighed that at like 7 months. But I was talking to my sister the other day because she has a 10-year-old, and her 10-year-old is just, she's scrawny, and
yes.
And I had to remind her, I'm like, I sent her a picture of me. I'm like, you guys used to call me knobby knees when I was a kid. Like I was a string bean, and you guys made fun of how skinny I was. And then I hit puberty, and like everything changed. And I'm like, so, cause her daughter's just like feeling behind because her, friends are starting to develop and she's just not there yet. And I'm like, we were the same way. Like that's how we were. And some kids are just like that. So
yeah. And it's so important that you say that, because I wish more people will, go downstream to think about how we have created body image issues for adults because of what we say to them as children. And it's very important to me. Like I am very petite as well. I'm very lean. My husband is very lean. We are tall, lean Zara models. Okay. We're very tall and lean. My son is going to follow suit. I know it. He is going to be super tall and super lean, and he will get teased. And my mission in life is, by the time he's an adult, I can educate enough parents as to why we cannot talk about children's bodies, whether they're lean or whether they're on the higher end of a percentile curve. There is no reason to comment on another human being's body, especially a young child. It's not funny. It's not sweet. It's not endearing to call your child chubby cheeks, or it's not, or say scrawny knees, or, you know, like it doesn't do anything for their mental health. All it does is teach them that my body is my worth, and that is not okay. You know, that's not okay. They are so much more than their body, and they can't control their body. Their body is genetic. Mm-hmm. Like largely, let's be honest, it is genetic. It's not the foods we eat. It's who we are. And then they create feeding issues, right? You create an unhealthy relationship with food because you've been told you shouldn't eat or you should eat. And then you scarf down unhealthy food, or you restrict yourself. Food is food. Food is enjoyable. Food is social. Food is nutrition. But it is not the reason your body is the way it is. Your body is the way it is because you have genetics that also say, you know, this is who you are. And we have created this for our children, unfortunately. And it's sad. It's very sad. And my husband has a lot of the issues with, you know, body image issues because he's a male who's very lean, and his mom still at 38 years old is like, you need to eat more. And my husband's like, oh my God, like, dear God, like, stop this. And I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, as Ryan gets older, I need you to develop insight and develop the ability to block that noise that you have been told your entire life, because I don't want Ryan to ever feel in our home that his body's not appreciated. Mm-hmm. His body, you know, and he is lean. Like, my son is following suit, and I want him to grow up knowing that you are amazing as to how you look, how you are, and we are going to teach you to be a kind human being. You know, that's what the goal is in life, I think, just to be a kind human being and love yourself for who you are.
That's such an important message. And even like your kids are listening to what you say about yourself.
Yes, of course.
As well. So that's like something that I'm trying to definitely remember too. Just even my daughter being around like cousins and aunts who are like, oh my gosh, it's almost summer. I need to go on this diet. And I'm like, no, like don't, like, I know. And like, don't talk about it in front of her.
And sadly, it's worse if you're married to, like, you know, if you have a heterosexual couple, the same sex is usually the issue. So a son is going to look at the dad, right? If there's a father figure, and then the daughter is going to look at how the woman talks about her body. It is definitely, I see, a gender specific. So with my husband, because he's the one who has his body image issues compared to, I'm fine. I love my body. I know there's going to be waxing and waning. I've created this mentality. But in terms of him, I'm like, you need to watch this, because my son is going to look at how his father looks at himself in the mirror and how he talks about himself. And also that's going to come out as to how my husband speaks to my son about his body. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's, you know, you don't even realize it. Sometimes it just it creeps in because your insecurities, you don't even realize it until it comes out in how you parent. And so that's my goal, is to actually help people understand that it is vital to block those messages that were told to you in your childhood. And you can do it. I've been told my whole life, and I went to therapy to be able to unpack all of that trauma of you're too skinny, you're this, you need to look a certain way, all of that, so that I can be a better version of myself for my son. And I think parents need to realize how important that is, so that they can be there for their kid and break that generational trauma that has been created for so many of us. Yeah,
right. And like you said, the generational trauma, I think that's like such an important thing to recognize, and then a conversation to have in your home. So since I have a pediatrician on the line, I have to ask some of the things that we always constantly Google. I know for one big thing is fevers, and I know that it's something that you talk about. And it's been a thing for me. Luckily, like, my daughter hasn't been that sick. I feel like a big part of it's probably COVID. And since she hasn't been around a lot of other people, I mean, just like family, but also since I mostly work from home, she hasn't been in daycare or really just like exposed to lots of other kids with illnesses. But she got her first fever when she was like 11 months old, and it was pretty low grade. And my husband's the one who like is like, you got to take her to the doctor right away, you know? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do if she has a fever. And that's probably something that you get calls about all the time. So what are a few best practices around fevers that this is when you need to call your pediatrician? This is when you can just kind of see what happens and things like that.
Yeah. So I have on my YouTube, I have a whole video that goes into all of it if people want it, again, you know, for more content than what I'll say. But your big picture here, if your child's under 3 months of age, I definitely need you to make sure that if there is a fever, taken rectally. Remember, that's the best way to take it. Actually, rectal temps are actually what's preferred under 3. I don't think people realize that. Under 3 years of age, rectal temp is actually preferred, and we still do rectal temps for our son who's 2. It's just the most accurate. So yeah, just what it is. But under 3 months, definitely rectal temp. If it's a fever under 3 months, you just let your clinician know. If they're under 2 months, it's considered an emergency in that we have to know right away. Between 2 and 3 months, there's a little bit of a gray area, but I'm just going to, for purposes of the podcast, under 3 months, let your child's clinician know. If they're not picking up the phone, I would call the nursing line or go to the hospital if they have a fever. Now, over 3 months, you're looking at how the child's acting. So fever is not an emergency. And again, fever is anything over 100.4. But if your child is dehydrated, so not making wet diapers or tears if they make tears, if your child is breathing not well, like it's uncomfortable breathing, or if your child is so uncomfortable, you give Tylenol or Motrin, depending on what age, they're able to give what, and they're still inconsolable, you want to seek medical attention. So I'm not worried about the number ever for a child who's over 3 months. What I am concerned about is how that child is acting. So if that child is dehydrated, having difficulty breathing, or inconsolable, and you know your child, like if they're just all the things that you're normally doing, you cannot get them to calm down. They are just still spiking fevers despite Tylenol or Motrin. 103, nothing's breaking. They're just miserable. Then you seek medical attention. But it's the actions. It's how they're looking that is so vital. Fever phobia is a real thing. I think parents think that immediately a kid gets a fever, it's a cause for concern. And in children, they get a lot of fevers. 90% of it, and probably more, is viral, meaning it's not anything to be concerned about. It'll go away. But you need to watch how are they acting? Are they hydrated? And are they breathing comfortably? And that's kind of the bare bones of when you should be concerned and seek an evaluation.
Mm-hmm. I did actually watch your YouTube video.
Awesome.
My daughter had a fever a couple of weeks ago, but and I was like, she's acting fine. She's not bothered. She had it for like a day, and we just kind of made sure she was staying hydrated. I gave her some like coconut water, trying to make sure. And then the next day it was just gone. So, yeah. So I'm like, okay, it's nothing to worry about. But I mean, it is still stressful, especially like your first go around. And sometimes it's also not helpful, like asking other people's opinions, because, my husband's like, well, our moms did this. And I'm like, but also so much has changed since our moms had babies, like,
right.
And then there's some people who, with the fever phobia and stuff like that. So it's sometimes hard to be like, yeah, she has a fever. And then people are like, oh, did you try this? Well, my kid had a fever and they had roseola and this whole thing. And you're like, oh my God, like, what's happening? So it's just good to have the basic information to look out for how they're acting, and try not to freak out.
And I would not go on like Facebook groups. You should not be having someone else diagnose your child fever. I mean, that's what we're here for, pediatricians. And everyone feels like they can become a doctor on Facebook groups. Like they feel like they've gone through the training. You do not have the nuance to be able to understand like what we know. We obviously paid a lot of debt to do what we do and guide you. And it's not like we'll always have an answer and say, oh, it's this. Sometimes it's just telling you when to be concerned, which is so much of going to your pediatrician, right? Like, hey, everything looks good. If the fever continues for another 3 days, regardless of how your child's acting, let's do another recheck, right? Sometimes we do that just to lay eyes and make sure, did anything change? But it's not always, like, oh, this is going to be roseola or this is going to be. I think when parents start to hear all that, then they get more worried. They're like, right. Oh my God, then someone told me that it was meningitis. Now my kid has meningitis. No, it's not. I understand that these things are realities. Of course, as a pediatrician, I know all of the things fevers can be. That is my job, to know all the things fevers can be. Your job is to, if you're concerned about your kid and don't like the way they look, to seek medical attention. And then we will discuss and see what needs to be done. Workup, is it just an evaluation? But your job is not to diagnose. Like you can't, like that's not your job. So, but that's the relationship with finding a good pediatrician,
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that a lot of people deal with is rashes. I know that that's something that we have dealt with our daughter. And again, the Google is not your friend here, or Facebook people who were like, my kid had this. But are rashes just kind of like a common thing that come and go with kids? When is it okay? And when do you need to seek help?
There's so many rashes. So I would say like an umbrella recommendation would be if your child is very uncomfortable with a rash, there's a rash on their body that's very bothersome, itching, scratching, you need to get it evaluated because it's bothering them. The other thing is if it's a rash that's changing in any way, when a doctor told you, like has looked at it and says to you, hey, if this changes, let us see it again, right? Another big thing is if there's a rash that is worsening with a fever. So that goes back to the bothersome point though, right? So just say your child has a fever and a rash, but you give medicine for the irritability, they're fine. But now that rash is changing. It's getting worse. The child's bothered. So it goes down to what I mentioned with the fever response, is that how is your child reacting to this? Because, if you are concerned about a rash and you want it checked out, we can always do that. But emergencies, it's rare to have a rash emergency. That's why dermatologists don't ever take call, because there's never a rash emergency. But if your child has a fever and a rash that's spreading across their body and they're miserable, right? Give them Tylenol or Motrin. If it doesn't help and they're still miserable and that rash is bothersome, so you're going down to the misery and the bothersome, seek medical attention. That is when we want. If it's a rash that's kind of coming and going and you're like, I don't know what this is, that's not an emergency, but maybe make an appointment just so that we can help diagnose it. But you are right that many kids get all these random rashes that just come and go. Many of them are viral induced, meaning can come around the time of a runny nose and they just go away. But if you're confused and it's not an urgent issue, like they're acting great, they're comfortable, it's always, you can take a picture of it. If your doctor has ability to check photo text, you can do that, or take it in to the doctor and say, hey, look, 2 weeks ago, my kid had this rash. What do you think it was? Just out of your curiosity. Sometimes we can't tell you because we need to see it in person, but at least we can guide you and say, nothing to worry. If this happens, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I feel like that's where the stressful thing is, right? Like being constantly connected to your phone. Like, I mean, you said it's kind of this connectedness has caused more anxiety in moms versus just like going to your pediatrician or really taking that time to sit with your kid and cue in and how are they feeling, how connecting with them, and knowing that information versus just, I see this thing, I'm immediately Googling, I'm immediately, freaking myself out.
Yeah, like I'm saying, it's a rabbit hole we talked about earlier, right? Mm-hmm. The Google and Facebook group rabbit hole. I don't Google and I don't go on Facebook groups because thankfully, because I'm also in my specialty. But when I am concerned, because I do get concerned, I go to the resources I need. And I think that's what parents need to understand is that you need to go to the right people. Like going on a Facebook group and asking about what this is, they're not doctors. They don't know. They don't know. I mean, you never should be getting medical education from people in a Facebook group. I mean, again, it actually is one of the hardest things as a pediatrician when someone says, someone on a Facebook group told me, you're like, okay, but that could be right for that child. Not denying that person experienced that for their child, but it may not be what you are going through and you may get misdiagnosed. And we have seen that. We have seen people on Facebook groups say, oh, you should do X, Y, and Z. And then the kid had a complication or the kid had something. Right. We exist for a reason, we exist because we want to support. Parenting groups online are wonderful for parenting advice. Sleep, feeding, my kid's misbehaving, but not for medical issues like fever, rashes, because that could be a liability. You could get misdiagnosed and it could be something more, or it could be nothing and now you've gone down the rabbit hole. So it doesn't help I don't think it helps anyone's anxiety to get advice from medical issues. Like, unless you have a known diagnosis and you're looking for support, like you have a kid with food allergies and you're trying to connect with other mamas who have food allergy kids, that's when I think it becomes so helpful. Mm-hmm. But when you're like, hey, my kid has this issue, what do you guys think? Ooh, it opens up. They don't have the ability to know diagnoses because they didn't go to medical school. It's so hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so tough. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like I said before, we're about ready to have our second kid.
Yes.
And it was different because like with my daughter, she was born September 2020. So with the pandemic and everything, we were super cocooned. We, put very strict guidelines in place for people being able to see her, hold her, anything like that. And now we're having our second kid, and it's just like outside of pandemic, let's say we weren't in one. 'Cause even if we weren't in a pandemic, I would be super nervous about even my daughter, going into the nursery at church and getting something and bringing it home to the baby, or just people. I mean, we always people are walking around. I think you just noticed how disgusting, I think the pandemic showed me how disgusting we all are. We have different things going on. Like you said, with kids, viruses just happen. They're going to get sick, but we want to protect our newborn. And that's something I've never been a germaphobe or worried about anything. Becoming a mom has completely changed that.
Yeah.
And with my daughter, we didn't really leave the house, but now I have she'll be about 18 months when the baby's born. I want her to be able to leave the house, go play with her cousins and go whatever, not be stuck at home. But then I'm like, what if she goes and plays with her cousins and somebody sneezes on her and then she comes home and then the baby gets sick? What are those best practices that we could set up for ourselves?
The hardest thing for this is it really comes down to a family's own level of comfort. And I know that may not be an easy thing to hear, but everyone has a different level of what they're risk averse for. And that's something that I think has been created even before a pandemic, but the pandemic has made that worse, right? We never stopped we live in a state that everything was open this entire pandemic. So just from social purposes, we lived a life of risk reduction, which means we do activities with the understanding that nothing's perfect, right? I find that when you try to control avoiding illness is how you actually get more illness. Hear me out. So if you're so hyper-focused on, I'm not going to get sick, that is going to cause so much anxiety in your family. And when you have more anxiety, that's going to increase your cortisol, and that's going to cause your immune system to tank, and you're going to get sick. You need to kind of go with the mentality that I'm doing my best with what I have, right? So resources are huge. The problem is I can't give everyone the same advice because it depends on your resources. I'm giving you an example. If I had a second child right now, we don't have any help, right? My son would be continuing to go to childcare. These are our resources. In the middle of a pandemic in February, I would be sending him to childcare, even with a newborn, because that is me as a pediatrician knowing, okay, there's illnesses out there, but who the heck is going to watch my older son if I have a newborn? Now, if you live in a family where you're able to keep your child home because you don't want that risk of bringing home germs, you have that option. But there are ways to have a kid in childcare and reduce risk for the newborn. A few things is when your toddler comes home, teaching hand hygiene, right? That way they get into that habit of always washing their hands the moment they get into the house. Teaching the older sibling to kiss the feet of the baby versus getting in their face. It's a special way to show affection, right? That, oh, this is your special place to kiss the feet. But newborns are less likely to get germs in their face and mouth from their feet because they can't put their feet in their mouth yet, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're kissing the face, you're more likely to get the mucous membranes that can transmit respiratory viruses. So teach your toddler, kiss the feet, and let that be his or her special place to, show affection to the newborn. Washing hands, and also, like I said, the kissing of the feet. When the kid is sick, like an older child, you do your best. It is impossible to separate your family. You don't have to quarantine your kid if that's not what you want to do. You don't have to send them away. If you want to, because that's what makes you feel better as a parent, like send them to grandparents, that's okay. But you do your best. Clean shared surfaces, wash your hand as a new mom before you breastfeed or formula feed. If you're feeling sick and you're in their face more, putting on a mask, like just say you have the flu or something, so that you're not breathing into the baby. But there are ways to reduce that risk. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But the reality is that we have to do our best with the resources we have, right? And for many parents, it's going to look so unique. So there's so much guilt we place when our kids get sick. We feel bad, like especially I know if it's a newborn. But I really want to reframe it that you could do everything. Keep your kid out of childcare. Keep your, no exposure to anybody. viruses don't care. They are invisible. They can find a way into our homes on surfaces. They find a way on us. You know, we are human adults. We sometimes carry viruses into our home before even realizing it. So focus on the basics of hand hygiene. Focus on the basics of, you know, showing affection as an adult. If you're feeling good, show affection to your baby. But if it's a toddler, teaching them to kiss the feet, you know, have their special way of interacting with the baby are going to be ways that you can reduce that risk. And I don't think having to pull a kid out of daycare is an absolute, but it also comes down to what the family believes and their resources as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you touched on that too, because that's the hard thing with the Instagram world, right? Where they're like, you need to do things this way. And it's like, you're not really taking into consideration the socioeconomic status, the resources that people have. Not everybody can just do this one thing because it's not the way that their family functions. So
Correct.
Some people don't have a choice to not put their kids in daycare, you know, or to whatever. Like maybe they could keep their kid home, but a lot of people have to work. A lot of people have to put their kids in daycare or school or whatever it is. So it's important to recognize that everybody's resources, everybody's situation, or maybe some people, it's not that they have to work. They want to work.
Yes.
You know, like
Yes.
I want to
Yes.
work. I love my work. And so my kid is going to go to daycare where I know that they're going to be playing with other kids all day. And that's awesome for them. It's awesome for me, you know, and just kind of, I feel like there's not a lot of room in some of those very specific groups out there that recognize that everybody's family is different.
Yeah, I mean, the resources we have is what dictates a lot of our parenting. And, you know, there's that saying that we do our best with the information we have. I add my mantra is we do our best with the information and resources we have at the current moment, because our resources ebb and flow, right? Sometimes you have help, meaning I've had a nanny, I haven't had a nanny, you know, like there's help. Sometimes I don't. And then also your information at the moment, right? Like what is it that you know right now in terms of like talking about COVID? Right now, we know that children do have good outcomes with Omicron. When you look at a big picture, yes, there are hospitalizations like similar to RSV and flu, but there's great outcomes being reported when children get this virus in the big picture. It doesn't mean that I'm actively trying to get COVID. It means that you are doing your best with what you can. And if you do get this, please know that there is a medical system that is designed to want to help you. I mean, I understand right now it seems like it's crumbling, but there are ways that you're going to get that help, right? You're going to get support. Your child is going to have the best outcomes for them. Like I feel like there's such fear that I'm going to miss something, or then my kid's going to get sick and it was my fault. And I really hope I can remove that guilt for so many to say that it's not your fault. Accidents happen, illnesses happen. It's never you cause something. If that was the case, you know, I mean, my son has been sick back to back with all these random viruses in daycare. I would be living in a pool of guilt, and I don't. I understand that it's a rite of passage for children when they start childcare. And then by the time they're 4 or 5, they're going to barely be sick anymore. They build a superhuman immune system, right? And it's so hard when our kids get sick because we hate seeing them miserable. We don't know, well, what's this going to turn into? Is this a virus? What is going on? But I feel like when parents can get educated on, here's what you need to look out for, here is when you need to be concerned. And that is what my platform hopes to do. You know, I want parents to feel more empowered, and I don't have to go down the rabbit hole at 2 a.m. I can watch a video that Dr. Mona released, or I can listen to a podcast, and I will feel more empowered in knowing that, okay, it's not all fear and dread. You know, my kid is going to be fine. And if they're not fine, here's what I'm going to look out for. And that is what I think empowers parents so much and can help reduce anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, like it's almost a rite of passage, because I remember talking to somebody else before who was like, sick happens. Your kid's going to get sick. And this is how they build immunity. Like they need to almost get sick in order to, if your kid never got sick, you know, like they wouldn't have, their body wouldn't know how to fight certain viruses or to fight certain things. So it's actually a good thing that they're building their immune system.
So that's why when people say my kid never gets sick, like, you know, I'm like, okay, your kid's probably not in childcare. Your kid's probably an only child. Like we're not understanding that kids get sick. Now, everyone has different immune systems, right? Every child is unique in genetics of the immune system. So me and you can both have an 18-month-old, right? We feed them the exact same stuff. They sleep. They could be the exact same lifestyle, but the genetics play a role too. So my son could get sick more than your daughter. And it's not that we did anything wrong. We did everything the same, correct? It's not under how multifactorial the immune system is. And a large part of a kid's immune system is learning how quickly to respond to an illness. So as they get older, you're going to notice that they're going to get sick, but the illnesses are not going to last quite as long. They get a common cold. The first time they ever get a common cold, it can lead to croup. It can lead to fevers. It can lead to so many things because that was the first time. But the second time, the third time they're exposed to that strain of a virus, they're not going to be as sick. And that is immune building, right? And you are right that it is going to be better and it's going to get better. It's just so hard when you're in the trenches, which I am too. And, having a kid in childcare is a reality, but it's also an understanding that it's okay. We're going to get through this. These are all, and as a pediatrician, I know these viruses. So I know, okay, hand, foot, and mouth's going around. Okay, flu's going around. Okay, this is going around. So I think knowing what to expect can help so that you know that, okay, if my kid was the one that just did not respond well to this virus, right? Ends up with difficulty breathing. I now know the signs of difficulty breathing. I got to get medical attention rather than, oh my gosh, what is it? What is it? I'm going to, something's going to happen. I just want parents to feel so educated and empowered so that they don't feel lost when they're worried about their kid.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I feel like that leads us to your new mom survival guide. And I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, so my new mom survival guide is a online digital e-course, which kind of, how you said you bought like all these different courses. It is 7 courses in one, and you can utilize it how you want. So you can go module by module. There's a search function in the portal that searches topic by topic. If you want to just do certain modules that are important to you. So it goes over newborn feeding, so breast and formula. It goes over milestones in the first year, play activities, and it also goes over puree, solid feeding, and sleep, as well as parenting mantras, like how to get through that first year. And then on top of that, we do private Q&As with me on our Facebook group. So yesterday we actually did one about development and play, which was phenomenal. We go over questions parents have, and I talk about, don't worry, this is when you need to be concerned, and private masterclasses as well. So my goal was to create a resource that parents don't need to buy 7 courses, but is balanced in the options. Hey, I want to sleep train my baby, or I want to feed my baby food, but I don't really feel comfortable with baby-led weaning. Well, here's how you do puree, but here is when I need you to start giving solid, more textured foods. I want to sleep train, but I don't like cry it out. That's okay. Let me tell you a more gradual method in my handouts that talk about ways to gradually remove associations. So I provide those opportunities with an umbrella of creating a baby who's loved, a baby who is independent as they grow up, and a baby who understands and has secure attachment to know that they have a loving caregiver by their side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. This was so informative. I feel like whenever I talk to people, I'm like, I wish you lived in my area so you could be my pediatrician, or whatever.
I love it.
But where can people connect with you more and find more about you and your course?
I think the best places will be my Instagram, which is Peds Doc Talk, PEDSDOCTALK, like Pediatrician Doc Talk, Peds Doc Talk. My website, pedsdoctalk.com. And like I said, I collaborate with so many different brands. I'm working with Enfamil right now on developmental education on their website. So enfamil.com, I have a bunch of articles from what we mentioned today about floor time, about independent play, about cognitive development, and I hope to work with them more in the future on providing those resources because development is my jam. I love it.
That's awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Like I said in the beginning, I loved chatting with her. She's somebody that I felt like I could have honestly talked with all day. And like, even after we ended the recording, like we chatted for a while, and she's just so cool. And I loved having her around for this interview because she's a wealth of knowledge, first of all, and just very easy to talk to. I feel like sometimes with doctors, you're like, I don't know what questions they ask or whatever, but she was great. So make sure that you go and follow her. She does have the New Moms course that kind of has a little bit of everything in it. So make sure that you check that out. I'm going to include the link here if that's something that you want to take, and make sure that if you're not following her on Instagram, that you go and follow her. All right. I love you guys. I can't wait to talk to you at 39 weeks-ish. I'm going on maternity leave. So after next week, I have a bunch of episodes recorded in advance for when baby comes. So if you hear me being referencing my pregnancy, but yet I've already had the baby. That's why I just really want to take time to bond and adjust to life with 2 kids, because I just don't know what it's going to look like. Vito's been off in the winter because they do concrete. So usually he goes back to work like right around when the babies do. So I don't know how much of him I'll have at home, but my mom's coming into town, then my dad, and then my sister. So I will have some support for a couple of weeks, but I just don't know. Obviously, you don't know what you're getting into. So I just wanted to make sure that I had episodes recorded in advance to give us time to adjust and to really give space for what we might need, whether it's extra rest, time away, however things unfold. So if you're listening to an episode and I'm referencing being pregnant or whatever it is, I do have episodes recorded in advance. So just wanted to make sure that I still had content coming out for you guys, and I have some really great episodes that I'm excited to share. All right. I will talk to you next week. I love you guys, and can't wait to share what we have in store for you. All right. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies, and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.